Chapter 401, The Loss is Not Small. So you think the pillar in the middle is the alchemy circle? Anduin glanced at Fudge, exasperated. Then, as if a thought struck him, he continued, What about the surrounding floors and walls? How are they maintained? Floor? Wall? We clean these areas regularly, but do they have anything to do with the magic circle? Fudge looked at Anduin, bewildered. Anduin rolled his eyes. These people had been maintaining the wrong part of the magic circle, focusing only on the central pillar. After a preliminary observation, he could confirm that the pillar in the middle was not the core component. Although it was costly to produce, it was likely the cheapest part of the entire alchemy room. Didn't Principal Dumbledore leave any instructions when he helped set up this place? However, Anduin found it odd. Given the strength of the magic circle in this room, even without regular maintenance, there shouldn't be any issues. The cost alone should ensure its durability. He looked at Fudge, puzzled. How often is this room maintained and cleaned, and what is the maintenance process? Do you use it for other purposes? Anduin asked. Fudge was taken aback by Anduin's sudden questions. Since Amelia had highlighted Anduin's role in the previous report on the smuggling battle, Fudge didn't know much about him. He wasn't as familiar with Anduin as Minister Budno and the others, so he was unsure how much he could disclose. Fudge glanced at Budno for guidance. After receiving a nod, he recalled, Because the room is closed all year round, we don't maintain it frequently. We clean it roughly every 6 months. The maintenance involves having full-time skilled alchemy personnel check the central alchemy pillar for any damage or blockage in the magic passage. If there's any damage, they repair it with a curse. As for other uses, Fudge continued, when the mysterious man fell, we confiscated a large number of dark magic items from fugitive Death Eaters. The warehouse was full, so we used this room as a temporary storage space. Fudge emphasized, but we only piled things around the room and didn't touch or interfere with the central alchemy pillar. We didn't store them for long. We quickly vacated a new warehouse and moved those items. It shouldn't have impacted the alchemy circle, as the magic induction circle is still functioning normally. After listening to Fudge's explanation, Anduin's expression turned serious. Where did you stack the items? He asked. Over there, Fudge pointed to the side, looking anxious. It shouldn't have interfered with the magic circle. We placed them against the wall. Placing them against the wall is problematic, Anduin said, shaking his head. The core of the magic circle in this alchemy room is embedded in the floor and walls. The central alchemy pillar is more of a console and amplifier. Storing dark magic items that leak magic power can easily contaminate the magic lines. What? Fudge and the two high-ranking officials were taken aback. They looked at their feet in surprise and then hesitantly took a few steps back, clearly afraid of damaging the alchemy formation. Don't be so nervous, Anduin said, amused by their reactions. Fortunately, the runes here are constructed with high-quality ulam steel and refined mithril, which are quite resilient. However, we need to conduct a thorough inspection to ensure there hasn't been any significant damage. Anduin's words brought a sense of relief to the group, but the realization of their oversight weighed heavily on them. They had underestimated the complexity and importance of the alchemy circle, and the potential consequences of their actions were now evident. Ordinary trampling will not affect them, Anduin assured, as he walked to the location Fudge had indicated. He took out a rune detector resembling a magnifying glass and squatted down to study the area. The results were as Anduin had anticipated. Some runes on the ground had been disturbed by external magic, causing the magic power to become ice-ordered. However, the impact was minimal, with only a few rune nodes being blocked. For Anduin, resolving this issue was straightforward. He only needed to use a withdrawal spell to remove the abnormal magic power. The materials used in the construction of the magic circle were of high quality, so the structure itself remained intact. After making this discovery, Anduin frowned slightly, contemplating the situation. He then glanced at the three people standing nearby with a peculiar expression. The three individuals, especially Fudge, felt uneasy under his gaze. Fudge, being the person in charge, was particularly anxious about the potential consequences if there was a major failure in the alchemy room. What's the matter? Is the problem serious? Fudge asked nervously. Well, Anduin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Do you have the circle circuit diagram or any instructions for the entire alchemy room? Based on the current findings, I can't directly assess the damage. What? What do you mean by damage? Is the rune circle here seriously compromised? Fudge's panic grew as he swallowed hard, looking at Anduin. Show me the circuit diagram and manual first, and then I'll be able to give you a definitive answer, Anduin replied, urging them to provide the documents. Wiring diagram? Instructions? Fudge looked bewildered and turned to Minister Badnow for help. He had never heard of such documents existing for the alchemy room. Anduin, the original rune circle here was arranged by Nicolas Flamel for the British Ministry of Magic 200 years ago. Later, due to aging, we commissioned Dumbledore to reinforce it a few decades ago. They never left behind any circuit diagrams or manuals. This knowledge belongs exclusively to master alchemists. Minister Badnow explained, seeing Fudge's embarrassment. Oh? So the Ministry of Magic has neither a wiring diagram nor an instruction manual. Does that mean I can do whatever I say? It seems that Britain isn't entirely devoid of alchemical knowledge. Anduin felt a surge of excitement, realizing this was his opportunity to make a fortune. Minister Badnow, directors, Anduin began, adopting a hesitant expression as if he had been deep in thought. To be honest, due to the lack of attention to the protection of the magic circle itself, some lines of the rune circle have indeed been severely damaged. It is likely that the black magic items stored here accidentally contaminated the array. All in all, the loss is not insignificant, he concluded. End of this chapter. Chapter 402. It's valuable. What? Fudge trembled all over when he heard the words, and Anduin broke into a cold sweat. Then what should we do? Could it be that this part of the rune circuit has been completely broken? Will it affect the detection circle? Minister Budnor and Amelia also looked at Anduin nervously. Although this alchemy room is usually unused, it is crucial for the Ministry of Magic's monitoring of the country during critical moments. If it really breaks down and news spreads, there could be significant security issues. Fortunately, I discovered it early, Anduin said, noticing the anxious expressions on their faces. He realized he might have overdone it and decided to ease their fears. The scope of the magic pollution I've checked so far is not large. Of course, I can't give you a specific assessment until I've examined the entire alchemy room. Then how do we solve it? Since you can identify the problem, you must have an idea, Minister Budnor said, trying to remain calm. That's right. The solution is actually not difficult. We need to replace the worn-out materials to restore the operation of the magic circle. At the same time, I can also perform an overhaul of the entire magic circle to restore its efficiency to a new level, Anduin said confidently. So that's how it is, Fudge sighed in relief, but then he remembered something. Didn't you say before that the materials for constructing the magic circle are very precious? Minister Budnor also realized the implication of Anduin's earlier mention of loss. How many materials are needed to repair this part of the magic circle? Actually, not many. The magic patterns that construct the rune array are made of ulam steel mixed with refined mithril. From the parts I've seen so far, only 3 ounces of ulam steel and 1 ounce of refined mithril are needed, Anduin explained. Upon hearing the materials required, the 2 female executives hadn't reacted yet, but Fudge's eyes nearly popped out. Only? Do you know how exaggerated the amount of material you mentioned is? I might not be able to buy those materials with a year's salary. Anduin chuckled. If you think it's expensive, you can also go to other alchemists for help. Maybe they have better craftsmanship and need fewer materials. He wasn't worried that they would actually go to others. Anduin was quite familiar with the domestic alchemy academic circles. To be honest, the rune circle in the alchemy room was indeed complicated. He estimated that only he and Dumbledore in all of England could observe the real problem of the magic circle. If they really wanted to find an outsider, they might have to ask for help from Egypt, but the alchemist from Cairo might charge even more. It's not that we suspect you, Anduin, Budnor said, trusting Anduin's statement but still distressed. 3 ounces of ulam steel and 1 ounce of refined mithril, those materials are really valuable. Is there no other way? Anduin pondered for a moment. I can use ordinary mithril and Agrippa alloy instead, but using second-level materials will adversely affect the entire magic circle's operating efficiency. Due to the quality gap, I cannot guarantee there won't be any emergency failures in the future. Anduin said this with an attitude of considering the Ministry of Magic, but he was confident that Minister Budnor would not agree to this plan. After all, for the Ministry of Magic, although these materials are expensive, they are essential for maintaining the integrity and efficiency of their critical systems. The value is high, but it's certainly not too exaggerated. You must understand that the inventory in the Travers family's possession alone is several times more than the materials he quoted. The Ministry of Magic will struggle with this. They clearly just care about money. As Anduin expected, Minister Badano shook her head after thinking for a moment and rejected Anduin's replacement plan. She didn't want to affect the quality of the magic circle in the alchemy room. Just follow the materials you mentioned, Ned, before. The maintenance of the alchemy room will be hard work for you, but we have to send someone to supervise the maintenance process, and you have to teach our people how to maintain it at the end. No problem, Anduin immediately agreed after hearing Minister Badeno's additional request. Sending people to supervise the process was of no concern to him. When he performed alchemy, those second-rate staff wouldn't understand much anyway. After confirming the job of maintaining the alchemy room, Anduin went to the Ministry of Magic almost every day for the next week. In fact, the detection circle in the alchemy room was of excellent quality, and if he wanted to repair it quickly, he only needed to cast a few spells. But because of his exaggerated claims to the Ministry of Magic, he had to make it look more complicated, especially under the supervision of 2 ministry staff. To show the value of his work, Anduin specially placed a lot of incomprehensible instruments in the alchemy room. At the same time, he used the ministry's materials to perform elaborate magic, leaving the staff dumbfounded. However, the real reason Anduin stayed there was to give himself more time to study the monitoring circle in the alchemy room, apart from some formalistic performances. To be honest, the alchemy circle of the Ministry of Magic contained a lot of gold and included many alchemy spells and magic patterns that Anduin had never seen before. This allowed him to absorb a lot of alchemy knowledge involving remote communication, remote monitoring, identification, energy absorption, energy storage, and energy saving in just 1 week. While studying the overall array, he also discovered spells for space locking and tracking, which made Anduin feel like he had found a treasure. You must know that for him, the biggest concern now is the threat posed by the portkey. He will definitely not let that guy Thunderbird go, but he fears that when he is ready to confront him, the other party will use the portkey to escape again, which would be troublesome. From Azalea, he confirmed that the Silver Spear does possess the technology to produce portkeys, which has complicated his hunting plan. But now, the space locking and tracking technology found in the detection circle has provided him with many ideas. He is confident that he can use this technology to develop a jammer that can restrict the portkey, and even create equipment that can follow the apparition or the portkey to track the direction and movement trajectory when moving in space. Sorry, Chapter 3 will be posted late today. End of this chapter. Chapter 403, Goal, Azkaban. The alchemy room was a treasure trove for Anduin. He often spent entire days and nights there, either lying on the ground or leaning against the wall, meticulously observing the rune arrays and the intricate magic lines. This dedication exhausted the 2 Ministry of Magic employees assigned to supervise him. To them, Anduin's commitment was almost obsessive. He never rested and worked tirelessly until midnight. However, the reports from these 2 employees only increased Minister Bano and other executives' trust in Anduin. On the 5th day of his overhaul of the alchemy room, the door key detection device finally returned to normal. Once activated, it could detect anyone using a door key within the UK through the magic circle. Anduin soon understood why the Ministry of Magic had kept this function turned off for so long. The magic power required to monitor the door key was immense, equivalent to the energy consumption of the entire magic power monitoring function. This meant that the energy consumption of the alchemy room would instantly double. While researching the magic circle, Anduin discovered that the alchemy room could also monitor apparition. However, enabling this function would exponentially increase the energy consumption far beyond what the Ministry's current magic power reserves could support for any significant duration. Under the pretext of overhauling the magic circle, Anduin took the opportunity to enter the Ministry of Magic's magic power storage room for a simple observation and research. This core area was heavily guarded by golems and aurors. Upon entering, he was sternly warned that he could only observe and not cast any spells, or he would be considered an enemy by the guards. Anduin complied, using a magnifying glass to conduct a brief inspection. He found that the structure of the Ministry's magic power source was not complicated, but its importance was paramount. The main source of magic power in the Ministry of Magic was similar to that of Hogwarts, absorbing and storing overflowing magical energy. Wizards from various departments casting spells, aurors performing exercises, and even magical animals or props contributed to this excess magic power. The magic circle, connecting the entire ministry, absorbed and stored this energy for other uses. The amount of magic power absorbed and stored daily was substantial. Besides the consumption in the supply department, there was always a significant surplus. Anduin had anticipated this, knowing that Hogwarts operated on a similar principle. The school relied on the magical energy of hundreds of students, and even during vacations, the magic power was sufficient. The daily magical output from hundreds of adult wizards in the ministry was even more impressive. To study the energy consumption of magic power in the ministry, Anduin recorded the outflow of magic power. He found that the energy consumption varied across the different floors, from the first basement to the 10th floor. The first, second, and 10th floors had the lowest energy consumption. This was not surprising, as the first two floors housed the minister's office and the legal enforcement department, while the 10th floor was. The courtroom was usually empty, and the department that consumed the most energy was not the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters or the Department of Magical Transportation, as Anduin had imagined. Instead, it was the Department of Mysteries on the 9th floor underground. Its energy consumption accounted for almost 1/3 of the daily magic power used by the entire Ministry of Magic, making it the place with the highest daily magic power output. This discovery greatly surprised Anduin. He had heard of this mysterious department, known for its extreme secrecy. Even Moody knew little about it, only that the guards there were a group of silent individuals who never spoke to others. The discovery of the magic storage room piqued Anduin's interest in the Department of Mysteries. However, he knew that place held great significance to the Ministry of Magic. Despite his curiosity, he didn't want to risk offending the ministry by probing further. He decided to suppress his curiosity for the time being and wait for a future opportunity to study the Department of Mysteries. After completing the research and maintenance of the alchemy room, Minister Budnor approached Anduin. His trip to Azkaban had been approved. Anduin, those 2 employees who observed your work gave you a very high evaluation of your maintenance in the alchemy room. I didn't even have time to thank you, Budnor said, clearly pleased. Highly rated? They don't understand anything and are just bragging in front of you, Anduin thought to himself, but he maintained a humble expression. This is what I should do. I have provided them with the future maintenance methods for the alchemy room. I believe you have received it. As long as the current alchemy room is properly maintained, it can operate normally for at least 100 years. That would be wonderful, Minister Budnor nodded in satisfaction, then looked at Anduin seriously. You need to follow me closely. Although your application to visit Azkaban has been approved, I must accompany you throughout the entire process, including your meeting with Sirius. I have to observe. Of course, I won't interfere. I hope you understand. It's all right, but when we meet, you'd better use the disillusionment charm. I'm not sure if Sirius will remain silent with others present, Anduin responded. No problem, Budnor agreed. She and Anduin mainly wanted to get Sirius Black to talk, regardless of his innocence. By the way, do you know the Patronus charm? Azkaban is not a safe place, and Dementors don't care if you are a criminal or not, she added as they reached the main hall of the Ministry of Magic. Don't worry. Although I'm not particularly proficient, I can cast it normally, Anduin assured her. He could only cast the Patronus charm proficiently. Producing a corporeal Patronus was still beyond him. Hey, not all Aurors in the Ministry can cast the Patronus charm normally. You are too modest. Sometimes I really envy Dumbledore for having such an excellent student like you. Why don't you consider joining the Ministry of Magic directly after graduation? I am willing to promote you to be my assistant, and even if you enter the Auror Command, I can promise you the position of captain, Minister Budnor said, looking at Anduin appreciatively. This was not the first time she had made such a suggestion. Chapter 404, The Cold Prison. Thank you for your kind invitation, but I have my own goals to achieve. Even if I don't work in the Ministry of Magic, it will not affect my cooperation with it. Currently, I am still an equipment supplier for the Ministry, and with such a relationship, working directly within the Ministry might bring about unnecessary complications. Anduin politely declined. I only value ability, and it has nothing to do with the so-called nepotism. Budnor replied with a smile, shaking her head. But what you said is reasonable. The Silver Flash firm and the Ministry of Magic already have a working relationship. After finishing her sentence, she firmly held Anduin's shoulder and reminded him softly, "Attention, we are about to leave." As soon as she spoke, both she and Anduin disappeared from the main hall of the Ministry of Magic. When they reappeared, Anduin found himself in a vast open-air plaza made of black rocks. Surrounding them was an endless ocean, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks filling the air, accompanied by the unique salty smell of seawater. Judging by the view, they were positioned much higher than sea level. The sky was dark and ominous, as if soaked in ink, making it difficult to discern the specific time. Light rain fell, and the cold December weather made the atmosphere even more unwelcoming. In this gloomy setting, a whole row of Dementors floated in the sky not far away. Upon noticing Anduin and Budnor, they directed their malevolent gaze at them, but seemed to obey some kind of rule, refraining from attacking immediately. After landing, Anduin activated his echo glasses, and the entire Azkaban prison was finally reflected before him. The prison was a triangular column-shaped building, at least tens of meters, if not hundreds, high, jutting straight into the sea. They were now at the top of this tall structure, making the distance from the sea appear even greater. This is the only area in Azkaban where apparition can be used. Stay close to me, and you won't be harassed by the Dementors, Minister Budnor said, letting out a sigh of relief. The weather was unbearably cold, and the bone-chilling winter made her long for the warmth of a fireplace. This plaza is so open. Don't you need to send someone to handle it? Anduin asked, puzzled by the empty environment. Didn't you see the Dementors floating nearby? Minister Budnor replied, enduring the cold with a smile. There is only one passage in the prison that leads to the roof, and the prisoners below are all unable to cast spells. Just holding the passageway is enough. Anduin nodded, though he found the defensive method to have obvious loopholes. The fact that the guards were a group of extremely unstable Dementors was concerning. He couldn't understand why the Ministry of Magic cooperated with such malevolent creatures. Although difficult to kill, Dementors were not invincible. If it were up to him, he would prefer to neutralize them entirely. These thoughts flashed through Anduin's mind briefly as Minister Budnor led him down a rocky staircase, gradually descending. Although they had escaped the bitterly cold open-air plaza, the damp and cold indoors offered little warmth. It was like wearing a pair of trousers in a freezing storm. Better than nothing, but far from comfortable. After a while, Anduin followed Budnor through the long passage. Finally, after passing through one more corridor, a fire appeared in front of him. It was a large corridor with smooth walls on both sides. Opposite the entrance, a brazier burned with wood, casting a warm glow. Beside the brazier, two wizards sat opposite each other, wrapped tightly in their robes, playing wizard chess with great interest. Despite their layers of clothing, they trembled involuntarily from the cold. Cough! Minister Budnor's cold cough echoed through the passageway, but the two wizards remained engrossed in their game, not noticing his presence. His expression darkened immediately. Who's there? One of the wizards turned his head nervously at the sow, ended of the cough, fumbling around for his wand. However, his thick clothing hindered his movements. When they realized it was the Minister of Magic standing before them, they stopped their search for their wands, stood up cautiously, and looked at Budnor with fear. "Minister, why are you here? Why didn't you notify us in advance?" The young wizard's face was extremely pale, whether from fear or the harsh environment. "I sent out the signing report a long time ago. It's been a week since the visitation process started, and you haven't received the notice yet?" Budnor's eyes sharpened with dissatisfaction. "Is that so?" The wizard scratched his head and looked at his companion, who also appeared confused. "I'm sorry, Minister. We did not receive the notification. Maybe the owl delivering the letter was scared away by the Dementors. This happens often here," another wizard explained with a forced smile. "That is no excuse for abandoning your post without authorization." Minister Budnor began to criticize, but was quickly interrupted by Anduin. "Minister, they are in such a difficult environment, and they are dedicated to keeping watch at the entrance. We still have business to attend to, don't we?" Anduin interjected, trying to smooth things over and giving the two wizards a friendly wink. The two aurors nodded eagerly and looked at Budnor obediently. Realizing she had been too harsh, Budnor softened. The harsh climate had taken its toll on her as well, and she knew dismissing these two would only make things harder. "Well, since Anduin has spoken on your behalf, I'll let it go this time. But remember, do not make this a habit." "Yes, Minister." The two replied loudly, as if they had received an amnesty, and smiled gratefully at Anduin. End of this chapter. Chapter 405, Hypors, Seeking Monthly Ticket Recommendation. "I'm here today to visit Sirius Black. Please send someone to lead the way," Budnor ordered without any preamble. "Yes, I'll take the two of you there," replied a wizard with a messy beard. The wizard led Anduin and Budnor through a long corridor and then used a key to open a thick iron gate. Beyond the gate, rooms lined both sides of the passage. As they entered, a foul stench emanated from the cells. "My lord, we are now entering the area where the prisoners are held. To reach Sirius Black's cell, we need to go down 3 floors. The prisoners here are not mentally stable, so please forgive any verbal offenses," the wizard on duty said cautiously. "It doesn't matter, just lead the way," Budnor responded indifferently. As soon as Anduin entered the area, the stench hit him, and he could hear various sounds coming from the cells. Some prisoners were crying out for justice, others were muttering incoherent, crazy words, and some were even cursing or singing hauntingly. "Excuse me," Anduin addressed the wizard, "how many people does it take to manage a prison as large as Azkaban? Just preparing meals for these prisoners must be a huge task." "You can call me Slim," the wizard replied with a smile, clearly pleased by Anduin's interest. "Although Azkaban looks big, the number of prisoners we hold is not as large as you might think. Currently, the cells on the upper 4 floors are full, but each prisoner has their own cell. Before the war ended a few years ago, it was even emptier. Usually, we have only 2 aurors on duty at any given time, taking turns every 8 hours. The environment here is very harsh. As for the prisoners' food, the house elves handle that task diligently." "So the 2 people at the door earlier are all the guards you have?" Anduin asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "Yes," Slim continued. "We seldom stay in the cell area except for occasional patrols. The Dementors patrol the cells, and with them guarding, there has never been an incident." As Slim spoke, a Dementor passed in front of them. The creature was even more terrifying up close. When it saw the 3 wizards, its ugly face showed a look of longing, and its mouth opened slightly. However, it seemed to recognize the marks on the wizards and did not attack. Instead, it moved towards a cell, opened its mouth, and a scream echoed from the room. Witnessing this unsettling scene, Minister Budnor frowned. "Are the prisoners safe? Have there been any deaths?" "Master, although the Dementors often complain about the lack of food, they remain obedient. Occasionally, we use the Patronus charm to calm any Dementors that become agitated," Slim replied with a smile, clearly accustomed to such scenes. Anduin looked at Slim curiously. The aurors guarding Azkaban must be proficient in the Patronus charm, making them elite wizards. It seemed like a waste to have such skilled wizards stationed here. Slim, oblivious to Anduin's thoughts, continued to talk. The prisoners on the upper 2 floors have shorter sentences, so they still have the strength to speak. When we go down 2 more floors, you'll see that the prisoners there are very dangerous and vicious criminals. The density of Dementors is higher, and we don't even. While he was speaking, several people walked down the stairs at the end of the corridor, descending 2 floors. The stairs here were quite inconvenient, with a long corridor between each step, likely designed to increase the difficulty of escaping. As they passed the 3rd floor, Anduin noticed it was much quieter than the floors above, just as Slim had mentioned. However, he could still see many unkempt prisoners peering out from their cells. Humans, fresh humans. My God, apart from those annoying guards, I can finally see humans again, one prisoner exclaimed, grinning with dirty yellow saliva dripping from his mouth. His face twisted into a crazed expression as he stared at the people passing by. "Hey, that brat!" the prisoner shouted at Anduin. "Come here and let me lick you. Just one lick, and I can teach you magic powerful enough to destroy the world. Ha!" Many other prisoners in the surrounding cells, looking haggard and deranged, joined in, taunting and laughing at the group. Anduin frowned at their foul language and swept his sharp gaze over the prisoners, casting a powerful fear spell through his eyes. Those who met Anduin's gaze trembled and immediately fell silent. The strange prisoner who had spoken to Anduin earlier convulsed and fell back, muttering something about Hapor's fear, though his voice was too low for anyone outside to hear clearly. With the prisoners silenced, Slim, who appeared harmless, glanced at Anduin in surprise, recognizing the unusual nature of the young man's spell. However, Slim remained silent and continued to lead the way diligently. Soon, they arrived at the 4th floor, where the most dangerous repeat offenders were held. Here, Anduin and the others could no longer hear any sound. The surrounding cells felt like abysses, hiding unknown horrors within their depths. "My Lord Minister, 10 cells ahead is Sirius Black's room," Slim informed Budnor. "Very well, thank you for your hard work. You can return to the top floor now. The rest is our business," Minister Budnor nodded. End of this chapter. Chapter 406, Lamb Chops. After Slim walked away, Minister Budnor nodded to Anduin, then took out her wand and tapped herself lightly, causing her body to disappear into the air. This was part of the plan she had discussed with Anduin, allowing Sirius to see him alone. Seeing this, Anduin nodded slightly and calmly walked towards the cell where Sirius was held. When he arrived, he finally saw his old friend again after many years. The cell in front of him was quite spacious, but the floor and walls were still covered with dirt. A figure with a messy beard and a dirty body was curled up in a corner where the light couldn't reach. In the faint light, Anduin saw Sirius staring blankly at the ground in front of him. In this biting winter, he was wearing a single suit, and his body was thin and stooped. He didn't look like a man under 30 at all. Rather, he resembled a 70-year-old man. "Sirius!" Anduin called softly, looking at the haggard Black with some distress. At this moment, Sirius trembled all over, as if he realized someone had appeared in front of his cell. He lifted his weary face, and his dull eyes could barely make out the figure outside the iron fence. After many years, he couldn't recognize Anduin immediately and stared at him in a daze. "Sirius, I'm Anduin, Anduin Wilson. Do you remember me?" Anduin squatted down to make his eyes level with Sirius and called softly again. "Anduin?" Sirius finally saw the other person's face clearly with the help of the light. After hearing the name, he was still unsure, but after looking carefully for a while, he recognized the young man in front of him. Seeing the change in Sirius's eyes, Anduin knew that he had been recognized. "Sirius, I'm here to see you. If you want to come closer, I have something to say to you." However, unlike what Anduin imagined, after Sirius recognized him, his expression immediately became ferocious. He began to tremble all over, turned around, leaned his head against the corner of the wall, covered his head with his hands, and buried his face in his arms and chest, tearing and shouting loudly. "Go, you go! I don't want to see you! This is not the place for you!" Sirius yelled in a hoarse voice while burying his head deeper, as if what appeared in front of him was not his former friend, but a devil. Seeing Sirius's strange behavior, Anduin couldn't help but frown. The man in front of him had completely lost the unrestrained and carefree demeanor he remembered. He looked like a beggar on the street, a poor wretch. "Sirius, calm down. I'm here to help you," Anduin said, his tone inevitably rising a little. "Go. I don't want to see you. I killed Potter and Lily. I killed them. It was me." Sirius was extremely agitated, and his voice was filled with pain and anger. He seemed almost mad, ignoring everything Anduin said. Seeing this, Anduin tried to comfort him again, but Black ignored him and just repeated those words to himself. Realizing that Sirius was unable to communicate and refused to engage, Anduin felt helpless. However, he could sense something strange in Sirius's words. The pain he showed didn't seem like a disguise. If Black had truly betrayed the Potters voluntarily, why did he show such a painful gesture? In this ghostly place, there was no need for acting. Anduin turned his head helplessly to look at the void next to him, where Minister Budnor was hiding. At this moment, Minister Budnor could only shrug helplessly at Anduin. She had warned him that Sirius was like this. But Anduin, he still didn't want to give up. After so many years of investigation and hard work, he finally had the opportunity to meet Sirius again. Today, he must learn what happened back then from Sirius. However, Sirius was now in a state of emotional turmoil, and words alone might not be enough to bring him back to his senses. Anduin spread his hands, and suddenly a bottle of potion appeared in his palm. He looked in the direction of Minister Budnor and mouthed the word sedative. Seeing this, Minister Budnor understood Anduin's plan and nodded silently. She was very concerned about what had happened back then, not because she believed Sirius was innocent, but because she was curious about how the location of the Potter family's residence had been revealed. With Budnor's tacit consent, Anduin gently opened the bottle and used his control system magic to distribute the potion, directing it towards Sirius. Under the influence of the tranquilizer, Sirius's mood finally stabilized. He stopped muttering aimlessly to himself, though he still didn't turn his head back, remaining curled up with his head buried in his arms. Seeing that Sirius' condition had improved, Anduin felt a sense of relief. However, he knew the key was to get Sirius to communicate with him normally. Considering Sirius's current state, Anduin realized he couldn't bring up anything related to Potter, Lily, Peter Pettigrew, or Lupine. He needed to start with peripheral but significant memories. "Sirius, remember this?" Anduin raised his hand, and a metal plate suddenly appeared in front of him, holding a large piece of charred lamb chops with pepper sauce. Just looking at it could make anyone's mouth water. This was a dish Anduin had cooked for Sirius during his first-year Christmas at Sirius's house. Since then, these pistachio lamb chops had become Sirius's favorite food. Of course, this might be due to Sirius' general enthusiasm for Anduin's cooking, as every meal Anduin prepared quickly became his favorite. But this particular dish had left a lasting impression on Sirius, and Anduin had prepared it today, hoping it might be useful. Minister Budnor, watching from the sidelines, was stunned when she noticed Anduin suddenly presenting a dish. She didn't immediately understand what he was trying to do, so she watched curiously. The aroma of the lamb chops was irresistible, and she couldn't help but feel her mouth water. End of this chapter. Chapter 407, Betrayal, Seeking Monthly Ticket Recommendation. Anduin placed the iron plate in front of the cage and used magic to waft the aroma of lamb chops towards Sirius. In the prison cell, Sirius, after catching a whiff of the familiar yet distant fragrance, couldn't help but slowly lift his head. His nose twitched uncontrollably, and his eyes involuntarily glanced outside the cell. Sirius had endured immense suffering in Azkaban over the past few years. He was perpetually cold and hungry. Suddenly, a hot and delicious meal appeared before him, his favorite lamb chops. The temptation was too strong to resist. "Sirius, these are your favorite lamb chops. They're still hot. Don't you want to try them?" Anduin's words made Sirius reflexively want to withdraw his head. Seeing this, Anduin pushed the lamb chops closer. "I'm just here to catch up with you. You don't have to be so nervous. I'll send the lamb chops in next. Whether you eat them or not is up to you." Anduin then used his magic to guide the lamb chops, along with the plate, through the iron bars without spilling any juice. He placed them in the center of the cell. At first, Sirius recoiled in repulsion, but the aroma was too enticing. He frequently glanced at the iron plate not far away. Anduin, outside the cell, remained patient and silent, simply squatting and watching Sirius. Eventually, Sirius couldn't resist. He grabbed a piece of lamb chop and stuffed it into his mouth. The first bite seemed to activate a switch in his memory, and he began to devour the food ravenously. Despite this, he avoided making eye contact or conversing with Anduin. Ahem! Sirius choked, having eaten too quickly. Drink something, Anduin said, immediately pouring a large glass of butterbeer and passing it into the cell. This time, he didn't use magic, but held the glass with his hand. Sirius, desperate to relieve the choking, didn't hesitate. He crawled to the cell door, reaching out for the drink. But just as he grasped the glass, Anduin quickly grabbed his arm with his other hand. Caught off guard, Sirius panicked. He let the glass fall to the ground and desperately tried to break free. Black! Anduin shouted sharply, looking at the thin but still struggling Sirius. At such close proximity, Sirius heard his name and involuntarily raised his head, meeting Anduin's eyes for the first time. Seeing the solemn expression of his old friend, Sirius's face was full of grief, and his eyes couldn't help but dodge. "Why did you choose to escape?" Anduin demanded, pulling Sirius closer and pressing his face against the fence. "Don't force me, Anduin. I'm guilty. I killed James and Lily. I know what you want to do, but staying in Azkaban is my penance. Only this way can I atone for my sins," Sirius pleaded bitterly, holding on to the prison door. "You finally talked to me for a reason," Anduin said coldly. "I thought you had lost your mind in prison." After Anduin made a teasing remark, he shifted the conversation, his eyes gradually becoming sharper. "Since you claim you killed the Potters, it proves that you betrayed them. You revealed their whereabouts to the Dark Lord. You used the trust of Potter, Lily, me, and the Order. You've been serving the Death Eaters from the start, haven't you?" "No." Sirius's eyes turned red at Anduin's words, his expression becoming ferocious. He yelled hysterically, "Even if you kill me, I would never betray Potter and Lily. I would never side with those monsters." As Sirius shouted, his struggle intensified. Anduin could feel a sudden surge of power from Sirius, almost breaking free. Fortunately, Anduin exerted more force, regaining control. "You didn't betray Potter and Lily?" Anduin frowned, noting Sirius's genuine expression and body language. He couldn't help but become more curious about what had happened. "If you didn't reveal their location, how did the Dark Lord find them? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Anduin's words, laced with the power of thinking system magic, pierced straight into Sirius's heart. "Stop torturing me," Sirius sobbed. "I never intended to reveal their whereabouts, and I couldn't. But I'm guilty. I know I'm guilty. I'm sorry for them." Anduin's relentless questioning echoed in Sirius' mind, breaking him down into tears. "You didn't? You couldn't? What does that mean?" Anduin was puzzled by Sirius's incoherent words. "You know they were protected by the Fidelius charm, and as the secret keeper, if you didn't reveal it, no one could force you to." Anduin spoke to himself, analyzing Sirius's words. Even Budnor, who was supervising, frowned at what Sirius had said. But Sirius seemed oblivious to Anduin's words, still crying, unable to escape the shadow in his heart. "If what you said is true," Anduin's deep voice echoed in front of the cage, "and you didn't disclose the Potter's address, then there is only one possibility left." Anduin stared at Sirius with wide eyes. "It means that the secret keeper of the Potter family was not you, but someone else." Chapter 408. The Truth. Anduin was able to make such a judgment quite simply. If Sirius hadn't lied, then there were only two possibilities for how Voldemort found Lily and James Potter. One possibility was that there was a flaw in the Fidelius charm itself, and the other was that Sirius was never the secret keeper in the first place. When Anduin was in his second year, he discovered that he couldn't contact Lily, which proved that they were indeed protected by the Fidelius charm. The spell is incredibly powerful, and it is impossible to bypass its secrecy rules. Whether through legilimency, veritaserum, or torture, if the secret keeper does not reveal the secret willingly, it cannot be known to outsiders. This left only one other possibility. After hearing Anduin's inference, Sirius's expression grew increasingly pained. He clutched his head with his only hand, as if he were falling into despair. "Stop talking. Don't make me recall these painful things. It's all my fault. I failed James and Lily's trust. I chose the wrong person." Sirius pressed his head firmly against the iron bars, as if torturing himself. "Just as I suspected," Anduin continued, ignoring Sirius's actions. "Since you weren't the secret keeper, who was?" It had to be someone you trusted deeply. The ones closest to you were James, Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. If the secret keeper wasn't you and Peter seemed too timid to be chosen, then it must have been Lupin, right? But no, if Lupin had betrayed James, you would have risked your life for revenge. Anduin shook his head, dismissing the idea. He then remembered what happened to Sirius after James was killed and immediately realized the key. It was Peter, wasn't it? The secret keeper you reselected was Peter. You wanted to deceive everyone, but you were too clever for your own good. Peter Pettigrew was the real traitor in the Order of the Phoenix. By reselecting him, you directly exposed the secret to the Dark Lord. After James was killed, you went after Peter for revenge, didn't you? As Anduin deduced this series of events, it all started to make sense. Sirius shuddered and fell silent as Anduin recounted the painful past. It seems I was right, wasn't I? Anduin said, seeing Sirius's reaction. Why don't you defend yourself? Peter was the one who betrayed the Potters. You should be innocent. Anduin, you're really smart. Sirius's voice was barely a whisper, but tears streamed down his cheeks, dripping slowly from his chin. But if I hadn't suggested changing the secret keeper, if I hadn't trusted Peter, James and Lily would still be alive. It's my fault. I'm guilty. So you'd rather be imprisoned in Azkaban to torture yourself? Anduin found Sirius's reasoning unreasonable. You think you made a mistake, so you want to punish yourself? Only staying here can make me feel less guilty. Anduin, leave me alone. Let me stay here to atone for James and Lily, Sirius said, his voice choked with emotion. Anduin felt a deep pain as he recalled Sirius's previous response. But you are innocent. Locking yourself up here is useless. If you truly believe you were wrong, you should go out and make amends with your actions. There are still many Death Eaters out there, all accomplices of the Dark Lord. Anduin noticed how negative and depressed Sirius had become and tried to persuade him patiently. I can't imagine getting out of here, Anduin. Sirius suddenly raised his head and looked at him with a mixture of despair and hope. Sirius wore a desperate expression. I've been here for so many years, and I can't forget what I did. It's my fault, and I can't forgive myself. You'd better leave quickly and let me fend for myself in this dark corner. This is the result I deserve. As for the other Death Eaters, I believe in Dumbledore, and I also believe in you. Even if I were to help, it wouldn't make any difference. Anduin was at a loss for words. How could someone be so stubborn, refusing to leave prison even though they were innocent? If Sirius wasn't willing to leave, then proving his innocence to everyone would be pointless, and the promise made by Minister Budnor would be unfulfilled. Anduin continued to persuade Sirius, trying to use the outside world and Lupin, his only remaining friend, as leverage, but it was to no avail. Sirius buried his head deeply, clutching it with his hands, resisting all of Anduin's words. Seeing this, Anduin turned helplessly to Minister Budnor, who stood nearby. The minister was still reeling from the shock of the news he had just received. Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper and the real traitor? Budnor found it hard to believe. The Ministry of Magic had even awarded Pettigrew a first-class medal of the Order of Merlin in his memory. Overturning this would have far-reaching implications, even more significant than releasing Sirius. However, when Anduin looked at him, Minister Budnor nodded, offering his support. Anduin then thought of a point that might finally reach Sirius. Sirius, what about Harry? Have you given up on your godson? James and Lily are gone, and it's your responsibility to take care of their child. Are you going to let Harry grow up alone, without any family? After speaking, Anduin took out a magical photo from his pocket. It was a family portrait taken 5 years ago during Christmas at the Potter's house. Upon hearing Anduin's words, Sirius visibly trembled, as if a sore spot had been touched. When he saw the family portrait, he couldn't hold back. He reached out, took the photo, and stared blankly at the image of the Potter couple and the young Harry held in Anduin's arms. End of this chapter. Chapter 409. I want to go out. Harry? Is he all right now? Sirius asked, his voice filled with concern for his godson. He's being taken care of by Dumbledore, but I don't know the specifics, Anduin replied. You have an obligation to raise him, Sirius. This is your responsibility. Seeing that his words were having an effect, Anduin pressed on. But I still can't forgive myself. Harry, no. Sirius let out another low cry of grief. He then looked at Anduin with determination. I have no face to see him, Anduin. I can entrust him to you. You've held him and have feelings for him. Maybe it's better if you take care of him. Humph. Anduin was furious. This is your godson. Why are you pushing this on me? Unless you're willing to clear your name and get out of this damn Azkaban, I won't bother with that child. No, you can't do this, Sirius wailed, torn between his unwillingness to face reality and the glimmer of hope Harry brought him. He fell into deep self-doubt. Anduin realized that Harry alone couldn't change Sirius's mind. The will of his old friend had been shattered. The room fell into a heavy silence, with Sirius lost in his thoughts and Anduin pondering ways to persuade him. If none of these living people could impress him, what should he do? Anduin's mind raced. If he couldn't stimulate Sirius with relatives and friends, what about enemies? Was there an enemy that Sirius couldn't ignore? His eyes lit up as he thought of something he hadn't considered before. Sirius, are you sure that Peter Pettigrew, who betrayed the Potters, is really dead? Anduin asked, looking at Black intently. Why bring up this painful topic again? When I caught up with him, that bastard committed suicide with thunderbolt explosion. Under that powerful spell, he couldn't have survived, Sirius replied, calmer now. Then can you tell me the address of the Potter's home? Anduin asked tentatively. If he really died, according to the rules of the Fidelius charm, if the original secret keeper dies, everyone who knew the address would automatically become a secret keeper. If Peter really died, you should be able to tell me the address now. Sirius was taken aback by Anduin's words. He carefully recalled the address where the Potters used to live and tried to speak. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't say the words, as if a mysterious force was preventing him. I can't say it, Sirius realized, his expression changing. He looked at Anduin with a fierce determination. That bastard! Peter Pettigrew is still alive. Sure enough, Anduin thought. It had always seemed odd that Peter, who was as timid as a mouse, would have the courage to commit suicide in front of Sirius. Why hadn't he tried to resist? This was incomprehensible. But after testing Sirius, Anduin confirmed his suspicion. Peter Pettigrew was not dead. Anduin. Sirius's eyes were now filled with anger and hatred. We must not let that guy go. That bastard who betrayed our trust. We must find him. That's something you should do once you're out, Anduin said, noticing the drastic change in Sirius's expression. He knew that Sirius was no longer in a state of hopelessness. He released the other man's arm and slowly stood up. Sirius, after retracting his arm, did not retreat to the corner as usual. Instead, he grabbed the railing in front of him, using it to support himself as he stood. I want to tear that rat to pieces with my own hands. Anduin, can you let me out? If you can't, I'll break out myself. I can't face Potter and Lily's spirits in heaven without avenging them. Sirius grabbed Anduin's collar, his tone fierce and determined. Anduin was taken aback by Sirius's sudden change in demeanor. What surprised him even more was Sirius's open talk of a prison break, especially with the Minister of Magic standing right there. As long as you want, I'd be happy to help you out. Of course, it's best to do it legally, Anduin said, turning his head to look at the empty space beside him. Isn't that right, Minister? Sirius was startled when he saw Anduin addressing someone else. He then noticed a figure appearing beside the cell door. It was Minister Budnor, whom he had seen several times before. As long as I can prove that Sirius is innocent, I will be happy to uphold justice, Budnor said coldly, giving Sirius a stern look. However, if you escape from prison before proving your innocence, I will issue a warrant for your arrest. Minister Budnor, have you been here all this time? Sirius asked, still processing the sudden appearance of the minister. But after hearing Budnor's words, he responded firmly, I just want to find that rat. No matter what method I use, even if the whole world hates me, I don't care, as long as I can avenge the Potters. What he means is that he is willing to cooperate with the Ministry of Magic's investigation as long as his name can be cleared. He is also willing to help the Ministry in capturing the fugitive Peter Pettigrew. Anduin interjected, trying to smooth things over for Sirius and Minister Budnor. Anduin then looked at Budnor seriously. Sirius couldn't have known the Potter's address. This can serve as undeniable proof that Peter Pettigrew is still alive. Isn't that enough to release him? Minister Budnor's expression hardened, and he shook his head slightly. That's not necessarily the case. End of this chapter. Chapter 4:10, Resistance. Why? Anduin looked at Budnor, puzzled. In his eyes, this was ironclad proof. Sirius could not reveal the address of the Potter's house, and the former secret keeper, Peter, was still alive. Although I am willing to believe in Sirius' innocence, it is not so easy to convince others, Budnor explained. In the eyes of other wizards who know the address of the Potter's family, Sirius, the secret keeper, is not dead, so he has not automatically become a secret keeper. Just taking the fact that Sirius couldn't tell the address as evidence, it's easy to think that Black intentionally concealed it to deceive everyone. I'm willing to undergo a memory test. They can't find that address in my mind. You know the Fidelius charm can do that, Sirius said urgently, eager for revenge. This can be used as proof, Budnor nodded, then turned to Anduin. I need to discuss with Dumbledore and Amelia first. I think they will be willing to believe Sirius. As for how to persuade the Wizengamot, we have to think long-term. When Anduin heard Budnor emphasize long-term consideration, he realized there might be other obstacles besides insufficient evidence. What? What do you mean? I have to stay here while the culprit who killed the Potters is still out there. How can you expect me to be at ease? Sirius gritted his teeth in frustration, glaring at Budnor. Why don't you let me out first? I'll catch that damned Peter, and then you can put me back in prison. I'm not afraid of staying in Azkaban. I'm just not reconciled. Do you think this is a place where you can come and go as you please? Budnor snapped back. Anduin stepped in to support Budnor. Yes, if you are released casually, you will only become a wanted criminal instead of a prisoner. In that case, you will have no chance of arresting Peter. And after all these years, are you sure you can find him once you go out? Revenge for Lily is not your job alone. It is our joint responsibility. Then what do you think I should do? Sirius paced back and forth in the cell, shouting in frustration. You have to endure here for a while, recharge your energy, and restore your strength, Anduin advised, turning to Budnor. Can you take care of Sirius in prison for a while? He suffered a lot here, especially from the Dementors. That's not a problem. I will arrange for the Dementors to be transferred away from this area, and I will also ask the house elves stationed here to increase his food. Budnor nodded. Anduin nodded in agreement, and then looked at Sirius solemnly. Next, I will work with Minister Budnor to find a way to clear your name. What you need to do now is to be patient and wait for us. Especially during this period, you must not do anything foolish. If you try to escape from prison, whether you fail or succeed, it will become an excuse for others to attack you. At that time, whether you are innocent or not, you will become a wanted man by the Ministry of Magic, and you will never have the chance to take revenge yourself. Anduin had put in so much effort, and it would be a pity if Sirius became a fugitive. Sirius's temper was very stubborn. He could either become completely withdrawn or act like a mad dog. Given the depressing environment of Azkaban, it was understandable to become a little unhinged. After hearing Anduin's persuasion, Sirius was torn. He was already ashamed, but knowing that Pettigrew was still alive filled him with endless anger and regret. However, as he gradually calmed down, he realized that Anduin was right. He didn't even know where Peter was now. If he ran out like this, if he couldn't avenge him, he would let that bastard go instead. Then he looked at Anduin solemnly. The young man in front of him was the person he trusted the most besides the Potters. Okay, I agree with your arrangement, but you have to get me out of this wretched place as soon as possible. I can't wait to be by Peter's side and bite him to death. Sirius declared with fervor. Anduin nodded in agreement. You have to be patient and trust Mem. I will contact you through the Ministry of Magic. No matter what, I will find a way to clear your name. After speaking, Anduin began to retrieve goods from his space ring, providing Sirius with all kinds of durable food and daily necessities. Fortunately, he had a substantial supply of such items, sourced from the large warehouse in his home's basement. He was determined to ensure Sirius had everything he needed. Eventually, it was Minister Budnor who couldn't stand it anymore and called for a stop. If Anduin continued, the prison would almost resemble a hotel. After that, Anduin and Budnor had a detailed conversation with Sirius, carefully understanding the events of that fateful year. Then the two left Azkaban and returned to the Ministry of Magic along the same route. Upon arriving at the Ministry of Magic, Anduin was eager to discuss with Minister Budnor the process of clearing Sirius Black's name. Will it be troublesome to solve the problem of Sirius? Where will the specific resistance appear? Anduin asked as soon as they returned to the minister's office. The situation is much more complicated than you imagine, Budnor replied, shaking his head helplessly. When Sirius was arrested, the Ministry of Magic did extensive publicity to stabilize public confidence. Now, almost everyone believes he is a criminal. And Peter Pettigrew was awarded the Order of Merlin. Think about it. If you were a member of the Wizengamot, would you want to overturn two key judgments and essentially admit you were wrong? Minister Budnor explained with a rather blunt example. Can't they change their position in the face of the existing evidence? Anduin frowned, understanding that politics often muddied the waters of right and wrong. It will have some effect, but there will definitely be people who will find various excuses and reasons to prevent Sirius's release. This involves prestige and could bring unnecessary turmoil to the magical society, Budnor said, frowning as well. End of this chapter. Chapter 411, Proof of Unlimited Self-Defense. Then what do you think should be done next? I can fully cooperate, Anduin said, looking at Budnor with determination. He had considered asking Budnor for a list of the Wizengamot members to visit them one by one. Whether through subtle threats or more forceful measures, achieving his goal would be easier. However, he knew that such actions would only push everyone against him and potentially cause trouble with Dumbledore. He wasn't ready to take that risk. I will find Dumbledore first and discuss countermeasures with him. His influence is a great help. At the same time, I will ask him to personally collect evidence from Sirius's memory. I'll start with the simpler parts and first secure Merlin's support, then tackle the more stubborn members of the Wizengamot, Budnor explained, looking at Anduin. As for you, there are two things you need to do. Either one, if accomplished, will make it very simple to clear Sirius's name, Budnor continued. Oh, what are they? Anduin asked, his interest piqued. The first thing is to find Peter Pettigrew. He is the chief culprit who indirectly caused the Potters' deaths and the reason Sirius went to jail. If we can capture him, it will be irrefutable evidence of Sirius's innocence, no matter how much the Wizengamot and those pure-blood families resist, Budnor said calmly. I understand, but Peter Pettigrew could be anywhere now. It's really difficult to find him, Anduin replied, feeling a bit melancholic. I am aware of that, which is why there is another task to consider, Budnor said with a slight smile. Another task? Anduin asked, raising an eyebrow in confusion. Help Scamander find the lair of the Silver Spear, Budnor said, looking at Anduin seriously. Mr. Scamander mentioned that you have a chance to track down the lost Thunderbird. If you can find those Silver Spears, it will be of great significance to us. But what does this have to do with Sirius? Anduin asked, still confused about the connection. If you can accomplish this, you can use it to negotiate with the Wizengamot for Sirius's release. Sir Merlin will fully support your decision, Budnor explained. Anduin was startled. Was the headquarters of the Silver Spear, or its leader, so important that it could sway the Wizengamot and Sir Merlin to overturn a previous judgment? Are you sure? Anduin asked in disbelief. He had already planned to deal with the Silver Spear, so this could be a win-win situation for him. Yes, I am very sure. If you can do this, the Wizengamot will make a decision immediately. Of course, we will try to resolve Sirius's case through conventional channels first, and only resort to this as a last measure. Even if we manage to overturn the case through hard work, we hope you can help. I am aware of the dangers involved, so in addition to Mr. Scamander, the Ministry of Magic will also assist you. Because this involves overseas activities, I can even issue you a special unlimited self-defense proof, Budnor said. Unlimited self-defense proof? What is that? Anduin asked, puzzled. He was familiar with the Ministry of Magic, but had never heard of such a thing. The so-called unlimited self-defense proof. Minister Budnor looked at Anduin with a strange expression. It's just a piece of paper, but holding this document grants you the authority to defend yourself by any means necessary. without legal repercussions during your mission. It is a rare and powerful authorization used only in the most critical situations. The certificate means that your identity is specially approved by the British Ministry of Magic law enforcement officers. When faced with someone threatening you with force, you can carry out unlimited counterattacks, including killing the other party, of course. In the international wizarding community, holding this certificate can prevent you from being arrested by local officials, as all your actions are permitted and supported by the British Ministry of Magic. Anduin nodded understandingly when he heard the explanation. To put it bluntly, it is a license to kill. It is reassuring to have the support of the Ministry of Magic if someone is killed abroad. Of course, the issuance process for this kind of document is very strict, and connections are very important. I will also bear considerable pressure. You have to think about it carefully, Budnor added, seemingly realizing the gravity of his promise. I understand what you mean, Anduin replied seriously. I can promise you that no matter how the serious case progresses, I will do my best to complete this matter. As for the silver spear, I am not entirely comfortable with it myself. That's good. Of course, you don't have to worry. Establishing a spiritual connection with magical animals is not easy. This is just a conjecture, Budnor said, visibly relieved by Anduin's assurance. No, I have a hunch that this will definitely succeed, Anduin said with a confident expression. Just give me another year or so, and I will find a way to trace the silver spear. Really? Budnor asked, his confidence in Anduin growing. Seeing Anduin so determined made his heart race a little. Anduin didn't respond directly, but instead smiled meaningfully. He had a plan to find the silver spear. Even if the spiritual link with Thunderbird didn't work, he had other strategies. He had been planning for a long time to deal with this silver spear. After finishing the conversation with Minister Budnor, Anduin left the Ministry of Magic. Budnor then called Amelia and Moody to discuss the matter with them in advance. What? You mean? Sirius is really innocent? Are you sure? Don't be fooled, Amelia exclaimed. She knew something about the minister and Anduin, but had always held a pessimistic view regarding Sirius, never considering the possibility of his innocence. I always thought Sirius was a good person. Why did he suddenly change? As for acting, I don't think it fits. That guy Black is not someone who knows how to hide his feelings, Moody said, relying on his understanding of Sirius to accept the possibility of his innocence. That's right. I was there at the time, and I can tell what's fake and what's real, Budnor affirmed. Sorry, some things are delayed. The last chapter will be published later today. End of this chapter. Chapter 412, 1 year later. But even so, are you really going to intervene in this matter? You must remember that you issued the verdict against Sirius yourself, and the evidence to overturn his case is insufficient. This will bring you significant trouble, Amelia said cautiously, still unable to understand Budnor's thoughts. What's the matter? Moody interjected, his expression fierce. If we've wronged him, we should naturally release him. Why should Sirius suffer in Azkaban when we know he's innocent? But the current evidence is not enough to convince the Wizengamot, Amelia countered, her political acumen evident. If you really want to prove Sirius's innocence, you need to gather more substantial evidence, such as arresting Pettigrew alive. Instead of releasing Sirius under pressure, even in the more enlightened Sir Merlin, such evidence cannot convince everyone, she added, clearly more knowledgeable about the Wizengamot than Moody. Moody curled his lips in disdain. He wasn't a member of Sir Merlin and preferred a simpler, more direct approach. I know, Minister Budnor nodded firmly at Amelia. It is indeed very difficult to reverse the case against Sirius, but this is what we should do. We cannot give up just because it's difficult. Why did you get involved in this matter? I can see that even if you refused Anduin, it would be nothing, Amelia said, referring to Anduin's initial request. Because Anduin is worth it, Budnor laughed. He has proven to us that he has the strength and mind to inherit Merlin's will. His qualities have withstood the test when he faced Sirius. He is not a ruthless person and is worthy of entrusting our ideals. So that's the case. Is it a test for the jazz group if you accept it? Amelia realized, noting Budnor's attentiveness towards Anduin. Listening to their conversation, Moody was confused. What do you mean? What kind of test? I don't understand. Isn't your poor jazz group just a chance to join with a badge? I wanted to join you on the spot, but you didn't like me. Tsk. It's different, Amelia said, giving Moody a stern look. We are looking for the successor of the next generation. Dumbledore is not young anymore, and Nick Flamel rarely appears. The remnants of the Saints' party are so divided that even Grindelwald doesn't know how to clean up the troubles he caused. They're only causing trouble abroad. Let's take care of our own affairs, Moody muttered indifferently. For the future of the wizarding world, nationality is not the only criterion. If there is too much chaos there, it will also affect us, Amelia said, her tone serious. But you test him with the matter of Sirius. What if he finds out and becomes disgusted? I know that kid. Don't think he's a good-tempered young man. He kills without blinking, Moody warned, understanding the philosophy of the jazz group but raising his concerns. I will confess to him afterward. I think Anduin has the tolerance for this, Budnor said. And based on the evidence we have now, the only way to save Sirius is through a trade. There is no other way. Amelia and Moody could only nod helplessly. In the following period, Anduin regularly asked Minister Budnor about the latest developments in the Black Case. He often visited Scamander's house to learn about magzoology from Newt and studied the travel water bottle in his possession. More importantly, he familiarized himself with the weak spiritual connection while taking care of Thunderbird. Although the Thunderbird was very friendly and close to Anduin, their spiritual connection progressed slowly. Anduin visited Scamander's house every 2 or 3 days, but after a month, he could only sense the Thunderbird's direction from a distance of a few meters. However, his ability to perceive the Thunderbird's emotions improved significantly. Anduin could clearly understand the Thunderbird's feelings. In contrast, the progress in alchemy equipment research was more tangible. From the black magic pocket and the travel water bottle that could summon the corpse, Anduin gained substantial knowledge in alchemy and learned several new rune structures. The travel kettle, in particular, was fascinating. Its magic principle was based on a core rune called dipping, which allowed magic power to infiltrate the material. The liquid stored in the travel kettle was usually imbued with various spells, such as the Reflecting Fierce Fire Curse, Universal Cracking Curse, Freezing Curse, and Expulsion Curse. The water summoned from it had corresponding magical effects due to the daily spell dipping, making it highly effective against fierce fire. Discovering this rune structure solved a significant problem for Anduin. A year passed. During this time, Minister Budnor tirelessly lobbied the Wizengamot, trying to overturn Sirius's case. Even with Dumbledore's support and willingness to testify that he couldn't find the address of the Potter's house in Sirius's mind, the Wizengamot remained unconvinced. The pressure on the wizards in the Wizengamot made them more conservative in their decisions. Although Anduin had anticipated this outcome, he was still frustrated by the stubborn wizards. However, he knew that expressing his anger would be counterproductive, so he focused on the deal he had discussed with Minister Budnor. Currently, Anduin's spiritual connection with the Thunderbird extended only 2 or 3 kilometers. While this was a significant improvement, it was still limited in the vast expanse of Europe. Fortunately, Anduin had a backup plan involving Azalea. After a long time, the Thunderbird finally got along well with this double agent, and they became engaged. End of this chapter. Chapter 413, The Album. Over the past year, Azalea had received 3 letters from Thunderbird. The first letter arrived a month after Thunderbird's escape, seeking information about the Ministry of Magic and Anduin's intelligence. Thunderbird was particularly curious about how Anduin and his team had tracked him down. However, the Ministry of Magic's higher-ups had deliberately kept the details of Anduin's tracking methods a secret. Following Anduin's suggestion, Azalea fabricated a plausible reason to mislead Thunderbird. She also inquired about Thunderbird's future plans and movements. Despite his escape, Thunderbird remained arrogant and refused to divulge any details about his activities. In subsequent letters, he merely instructed Azalea to continue her undercover work. However, in the most recent letter, Thunderbird issued a new order. He specifically asked Azalea for the list of British participants at the upcoming International Alchemy Conference. with a particular focus on the Ministry of Magic and Anduin. It was clear that Thunderbird was very interested in the British delegation attending the conference. To Anduin, Thunderbird's inquiries were a blatant indication that he was in Egypt. It seemed certain that the Silver Spear would make another move during the International Alchemy Conference, and Thunderbird would likely be present. Anduin suspected that Thunderbird planned to use the conference as an opportunity to confront him, as Thunderbird was known to be vengeful. This suited Anduin perfectly. He was more concerned about finding Thunderbird than avoiding him. He instructed Azalea to confirm in her reply that he would definitely attend the conference. Meanwhile, Anduin's Silver Flash Trading Company had experienced rapid growth over the past year. Initially, the company was a supplier for the Ministry of Magic and had its own basic business operations. Later, they established a partnership with St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, becoming their supplier of medical equipment. They also secured a contract with the British Wizarding Broadcasting Corporation to produce magic tape recorders at a lower cost, becoming their manufacturer. Through the British Wizarding Broadcasting Corporation, Anduin connected with the Wizarding Wireless Network and discovered that his former senior, Glenda Cheetok, who had taught him the Wind and Wave expulsion spell, was now the host of the Magic Time music program. Leveraging this connection, Anduin also established relationships with famous Wizarding World musicians, including singer Celestina Warbeck and the band Weird Sisters. They agreed to produce record albums, with the profits split evenly. Thanks to the mutual promotion by these artists and the company, as well as several in-store signing events, sales of Anduin's gramophones and records skyrocketed. Celestina Warbeck's international fame even led to the sale of Silver Flash Company products abroad. Alchemy companies in the French wizarding world began contacting Anduin, eager to become his distributors. In addition to the phonograph business, other consumer products also thrived. During this period, the vampire Shaltir played a significant role. Her previous clan, the Toledo, was known for their love of art, giving Shaltir the opportunity to showcase her skills. She became the second product designer at Silver Flash Trading Company, following Vivienne. Shaltir designed various amulet cases and other consumer products for the store, infusing them with a unique artistic flair. The Silver Flash Trading Company, once a modest store with only a few products, had grown significantly over the past year. Now, it spanned over 100 square meters, filled with an array of enchanting items that appealed to wizards and witches alike. The store's medieval Gothic style added to its allure, making it a popular destination. It was noon, a time when the store typically saw fewer customers. Hog, the loyal dog, sat by the counter, resting his chin on his paw and yawning. Shaltir, meanwhile, wandered aimlessly around the store, her eyes fixed on her Lolita-style leather boots, searching for any speck of dust. She was supposed to be helping out as a salesperson, but the lack of customers left her feeling increasingly bored. "Chi-Chi, what are we having for lunch?" "I haven't had Mao Suiwang in ages, and there's blood duck, blood sausage, and pig's blood soup. Just talking about it is making me hungry," Shaltir complained, rubbing her stomach as she watched Cheeky clean the shelves. "You glutton, ever since you got here, you haven't stopped eating. How can you eat so much?" "I feel like I've lost weight recently," Hog remarked, glancing at Shaltir with a bemused expression. "You've got some nerve, you stupid dog. You eat the most in the family and only pick out the meat. Why don't you try being a vegetarian?" Shaltir retorted angrily. Despite her initial reluctance, Shaltir had grown accustomed to life at Anduin's store. The delicious meals prepared by Cheeky had convinced her to stay, and Anduin wasn't a demanding boss. Her daily tasks included helping out in the store and occasionally providing blood for Anduin's experiments. Life was relatively carefree, except for the constant bickering with Hog. "Where have you ever seen a vegetarian wolf? Why don't you try being a dead bat?" Hog shot back, rolling his eyes at Shaltir. Then he turned to Chi-Chi. "By the way, we're getting a holiday soon. Chi-Chi, where do you think we should go?" "I think staying at home is quite comfortable. It's not long after Christmas, and it's still cold outside," Chi-Chi replied, finishing her task. "If you ask me, we should visit the Weasleys. I bet Ginny misses Hog a lot." It's been over half a year since the last summer vacation, Shaltair teased, knowing that Guinea was Hog's nemesis. Bah, what kind of idea is that? Hog snapped, glaring at Shaltair. Then, with a mischievous grin, he added, I think we should go for an outing in the wild, bask in the sun, and maybe even roast a certain bat to death. You! Shaltair's eyes widened in anger, but before the argument could escalate, Anduin suddenly interrupted their conversation. End of this chapter. Chapter 414, Basement Upgrade. My lord. The three people busy in the shop noticed Anduin, who had apparated into the center of the room, and immediately stood up straight, greeting him respectfully. Anduin hadn't changed much in appearance over the past year, except his black hair had grown back. He was dressed in a hunter's attire that allowed for easy movement, complete with leather wristbands, looking very neat and ready for action. I'm going to leave and enter the Forbidden Forest for a few days. You guys look after the store, Anduin said bluntly, without much formality. He then turned to Hog. Do you want to come with me this time? I'm going to visit the Centaur tribe. I remember you haven't seen Firenze, Ronan, and the others for a while. Go back to the Forbidden Forest? Yes, yes, Hog immediately agreed, jumping with excitement. During his 2 years at Hogwarts, he often visited the Forbidden Forest and became close friends with several young centaurs. Now that he had the opportunity to go out and play, he naturally wouldn't refuse. Shaltair, standing nearby, pouted enviously. My lord, why are you taking Hog and not me? I also like nature. I've never seen the Forbidden Forest you mentioned. Forget it. The centaur tribe in the Forbidden Forest hates black magic creatures the most. If they see you, they might chop you up. Hog teased her mercilessly, grinning proudly. I have business to attend to this time, and you can't come and go during the daytime, so let's forget it. Anduin also refused. He then looked down at Hog again. Follow me to the laboratory first. I need to prepare something. He reached out and stroked Hog's head, leading him to teleport directly into the basement. The basement had changed significantly compared to before. Anduin had enlarged the entire underground space using the untraceable stretching curse, a technique he learned from Newt's home in the magical zoo area. If he hadn't saved all the good materials in his hand, the space would be even larger. Fortunately, the current area was more than enough. Under this huge space, Anduin had repartitioned and reorganized the area. In addition to the original alchemy laboratory and spell laboratory, he had added a study room, bedroom, potion room, medical room, and production workshop. The demented Izeron had been transferred to the medical room. Anduin took Hog and pushed the door into the production workshop. There were 8 neatly arranged magical lathes in the workshop. With these lathes, the production efficiency of products in Anduin's shop was extremely high. The increase in the number of lathes was also related to his cooperation with the Magic Hospital and the Magic Broadcasting Company. As sales increased, production capacity naturally had to keep up. Moreover, the current magical lathes had been upgraded by Anduin. They had evolved from multifunctional lathes that could process all products to refined lathes that could process single components and products. This upgrade was mainly to improve product quality. Although the multifunctional lathe was versatile, its precision and processing details were rough. After upgrading to refined lathes, the product technology immediately rose to a very high level. Most of the lathes were shut down at this time, except for one dedicated to the production of records. This lathe was producing Celestina Warbeck's new song, Boys, Return the Bludger and Throw the Quaffle. The song had been chosen as the team anthem of Puddlemere United in the Quidditch League. Anduin had heard from Celestina Warbeck that she also planned to donate the profits from the sale of the album to St. Mungo's Hospital, the hospital for magical injuries. The only thing Celestina can donate is her own. But no matter what, with famous singer, Quidditch team anthem, public welfare, and so many other gimmicks put together, plus the signing event when the album is released, Anduin can imagine that record sales are sure to hit new highs. For this reason, he plans to produce more. Even if he produces more than needed, it doesn't matter. After half a year, when those little wizards are on summer vacation, there will be a summer special. This is a strategy he learned from a savvy marketer on a certain game platform in his previous life. If it doesn't work, he can package and sell it together with the new phonograph that will be launched later. He even thought of a theme for the new phonograph style, which he calls Summer Quidditch. As long as the phonograph is turned on, several exquisite Quidditch figures will appear on the disc, riding brooms with colorful tails, chasing the record like a circular track. Anduin even considered joint activities with different teams. Fans could buy the phonograph of their favorite team, and the figures displayed on the phonograph would wear the team's uniform. He could even include the opposing team's mascot. He also thought of a collaboration with the Broomstick Company. For example, buying a Nimbus Series broomstick and the Silver Flash phonograph at the same time could offer discounts or gifts. After all, he has quite a lot of corporate clients. Many broomstick companies have ordered equipment from him for daily security, including Gringotts, which is right across from his store. So now, Anduin seems to have grown into a skilled entrepreneur. After entering the workshop, Anduin didn't focus on the lathes, but walked towards the corner of the workshop. There, a workbench was arranged, and on it was a rectangular glass cylinder more than 1 meter long, half a meter wide, and half a meter high. The glass jar was filled with liquid, and silver and blue intersecting electric sparks kept flickering in the liquid, like lightning trails across the air. In the middle of the glass tank, something that looked like a dry branch was soaked in it. Upon closer inspection, it was the 1 meter long dragon heart tendon he had obtained from the Travers family. The dragon heart tendon was affected by the current in the liquid, constantly absorbing and casting arcs. Now, the entire dragon heart tendon looked like a silver metal branch. Anduin approached the glass tank and slowly stroked his hand on the glass, staring at the dragon heart tendon undulating in the water with piercing eyes. It has been soaked for 10 months, and the attributes have been fused to the extreme. Now it is waiting for the final processing. I hope your final form can satisfy people, he muttered. After saying this, Anduin reached into the water tank and pulled out the dragon's heart tendon. End of this chapter. Chapter 415, The Centaur Camp. Let's go, Anduin said, placing the dragon's heart tendon, now dyed silver blue by the wild thunder rune, into a long wooden box. With one hand holding the box and the other gripping Hog, he apparated. They reappeared in the Forbidden Forest, but not in its dense depths. Instead, they found themselves in a centaur camp, surrounded by wooden houses and tents that stood 5 or 6 meters high. The architecture of the centaurs was primitive, yet exuded a raw, barbaric beauty. They used trees, animal skins, and linen to construct houses resembling yurts, but taller than human dwellings, often exceeding 3 meters in height. The camp had the appearance of a small village, bustling with activity. Since the downfall of the mysterious man, the scattered centaur tribes had reunited under the call of their elders. Nearly 100 centaurs were stationed and patrolling the area. This camp was the largest gathering place and served as the town center for the centaurs in the entire Forbidden Forest, where they exchanged goods and traded. Anduin had played a significant role in helping these centaur tribes establish this place. Over the past 2 years, he had been in constant communication with them, using materials from human society to trade for special products from the Forbidden Forest. He exchanged items like salt, parchment, cloth, kitchen utensils, ironware, tea, coffee, and tobacco for magical animal furs and herbs. This trade was a very primitive mode of communication. Initially, Anduin wanted to help the centaurs live a more civilized life, but many centaurs, including their elders, rejected this idea. They preferred to embrace nature and maintain their primitive environment. They even refused the better quality cotton cloth and fine tools Anduin offered, opting instead for rough, wear-resistant linen and iron tools made of fine steel. Anduin felt helpless about this, as it made him feel like he was taking advantage of the centaurs. Despite this, Anduin showed enough sincerity when dealing with these honest and simple centaurs. The centaurs, in turn, accepted a certain limit of material assistance and transactions, but were unwilling to abandon their traditions. They believed that Anduin's generosity in trade was excessive and against common sense. Initially, Anduin found their trading logic uncomfortable, but he eventually adapted. Around the camp, many centaurs were busy with their own affairs. Female centaurs were drying furs on the fence, their fur processing methods superior to those of human society, especially for magical animal skins, which retained their magical properties better. Anduin even entrusted them with processing magical animal skins he collected from other places. Adult centaurs patrolled the camp's perimeter, while a few chased each other on the dirt roads within the camp, which were paved with loose, soft soil. In front of the yurt-like houses, some old centaurs stood or lay down, smoking water pipes or carving arrows. The entire camp exuded an atmosphere of peaceful coexistence with a touch of wildness. Despite their busy activities, all the centaurs nodded to Anduin when they saw him. He was the only wizard, aside from Hagrid, who could freely enter and leave the camp. This courtesy was a testament to the help he had provided to many centaur tribes. Other human wizards, if they dared to enter, would likely be met with hostility or even forceful expulsion. The centaur community was highly protective of their natural environment and wary of humans who sought to destroy it. Since 1811, the International Confederation of Wizards has determined that centaurs meet the definition of human. However, the Ministry of Magic's classification of centaurs as magical beings with nearly human intelligence has been a point of contention. Centaurs feel insulted by this classification and have even requested the British Ministry of Magic to classify them as beasts instead. They do not wish to share the definition of human with vampires, hags, wizards, and other creatures. The Ministry of Magic's Division for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures maintains a centaur liaison office, but it is rarely used by centaurs. When the Department of Magical Creature Management and Control learned about Anduin's relationship with the centaurs, they hoped he could facilitate contact between the Centaur Liaison Office and the centaur tribe. Being assigned to this department is often seen as a dead-end job. Anduin, respecting the centaurs' autonomy, asked for their opinions. The centaurs unanimously rejected the idea, stating they would not accept any humans other than Anduin approaching them. They even warned that they might use force against any wizards who overstepped their boundaries. Interestingly, Hagrid has a good relationship with the centaurs because they do not consider him entirely human. Anduin found this concept baffling and even joked about it with Hagrid, who took no offense. At this moment, Anduin led Hog through the camp's outer perimeter towards its center. Although the camp had few houses, it covered a large area due to the size of each rug. After navigating a few turns, Anduin arrived at a central square where the centaur elder, Brand Varden, was training several young centaurs. They had set up several fences of varying heights on the playground, and the young centaurs had to leap over these fences at high speeds while shooting at moving targets with bows and arrows. The training field, equipment, and targets were crafted by Anduin. Initially, he thought the centaurs would reject these alchemical products, but they accepted them after experiencing their utility. At this time, a centaur with a vigorous posture was leaping over a guardrail more than a meter high. Each time they crossed a guardrail, they quickly bent their bows and shot at a moving target. Despite the rapid pace, the centaurs hit their targets accurately and continued running towards the next guardrail, each higher than the last. The final guardrail was nearly 2 meters high, a significant challenge even for adult centaurs. The centaur currently in training maintained high speed, crossing one guardrail after another, hitting the targets with precision. As he approached the last guardrail, he launched himself with all his strength. His front legs cleared the guardrail, but as he was about to land perfectly, his hind legs caught on the guardrail, causing a slight stumble. End of this chapter. Chapter 416, Forging Bang. The centaur lost his balance after being hooked by the guardrail. His two front legs failed to land properly, causing him to fall straight into the mud. His head plunged directly into the soft soil, and the horse part of his body moved forward due to inertia, folding into a fallen V shape. His lower body was exposed in a very indecent manner, leaving him in a state of utter embarrassment. Ha! Hog immediately clutched his stomach and laughed loudly at the sight. Ronan, you have your day too. You dared to laugh at me before for not being able to jump the last railing, and look at yourself now. You fell worse than I did back then. How does it feel? Does your face hurt? After his verbal jab, Hog rushed straight to the fallen Ronin, eager to show off. Hey, isn't this Ronin, who we claim to be the #1 warrior of the centaurs? What's the matter? You fell so badly. Don't you pretend to be superior? Don't you think you're awesome? Should I spread the word about your deeds today in the camp? Hog circled around Ronin, his joy uncontrollable, laughing heartily as if he would burst from the amusement. Meanwhile, Ronin struggled to get up, angrily brushing the dirt off his face. He glared at Hog, who was still mocking him, and his face turned red with embarrassment. Why are you here? Really, of all times, Ronin grumbled. After Hog started following Anduin, he often visited the Forbidden Forest. Being a non-human, he was quite familiar with the centaurs. They all shared a mutual dislike for the werewolf wizard Griffin, which fostered a good relationship between Hog and young centaurs like Ronan, Firenze, and Bane, who had also been persecuted. They often hung out together in the Forbidden Forest, hunting and chatting. When the training ground was built, Hog tried it himself. Despite his good physical fitness, the last guardrail was extremely high, and he had struggled with it. Ronan had laughed at him back then, but now the tables had turned. What? Afraid people will see you make a fool of yourself? I have to help you publicize it, Hog teased, then quickly ran towards the nearby camp, shouting loudly, Come see! Ronan made a fool of himself today. Didn't you see how ridiculous he fell? His face is swollen. Come back here! Ronan, already embarrassed, was infuriated by Hog's antics. He grabbed the handle of his longbow and chased after Hog like a madman. Although Hog wasn't as fast as a centaur, Anduin's long-term training had made him quite agile. With a few sudden stops and turns, he managed to lose Ronan, causing a commotion that shook the entire camp. The centaur elder Brand Varden, along with other young centaurs and Anduin, were all amused by Hog's antics. Several young centaurs even covered their mouths, snickering. Anduin, you're here, Brand Varden said, turning to Anduin after seeing Ronan run off in pursuit of Hog. Yeah, Anduin replied, nodding as he suppressed his smile. I have to trouble you this time. When would be a convenient time? Haha, your business is the business of our centaur camp. There's no trouble at all. Let's go now, Brand Varden laughed heartily. He then addressed the young centaurs. Today's training is over. You can move freely. Firenze and Bane, follow me. With that, Brand Varden dismissed the training centaurs and led Anduin, Firenze, and Bane out of the camp. The group headed towards a nearby hill, climbing to the top in silence. The summit was flat, with a yurt built on the open space next to it which could... From the open door of the yurt, the interior resembled a blacksmith shop from the Middle Ages. A massive stove dominated the space, accompanied by an equally large bellows. In front of the stove stood a towering anvil, over a meter high, and nearby was a water tank for quenching. Various metal hammers of different sizes were scattered on surrounding tables, along with numerous semi-finished hunting knives, spearheads, daggers, iron pots, and other utensils. This was the centaur camp, specially buoy, elk for crafting equipment, and ironware. The centaurs, being tall, required larger than normal equipment, which gave the place a formidable and imposing atmosphere. Anduin had come here today to forge a piece of equipment with the help of the centaur's strength. These horsemen possessed immense power and exceptional forging skills, producing extremely durable ironware. Brandwadden led the way, entering the yurt first and calling out to two young centaurs. Bane, hurry up and start the fire. Heat up the furnace as soon as possible. Firenze, you'll be in charge of the pliers later. Be careful. Yes, Elder, the two centaurs responded promptly. Bane filled the stove with fuel and vigorously worked the bellows, soon making the yurt quite stuffy. Anduin, take out the materials you want to use, Brandwadden instructed, bringing Anduin to the workbench and retrieving a large stone scoop. Anduin didn't waste any time. He had already discussed the purpose of this visit with Brandwadden and had been eagerly awaiting the completion of the dragon's tendon. He took out several pieces of metal from his interspatial ring. Among them were 2 pieces of ulam steel, one large and one small, and 2 smaller pieces of refined mithril, their surfaces glowing with a fluorescent light. These high-grade metals represented all of Anduin's possessions, acquired from the Travers family and the Ministry of Magic, saved for this very moment. The metal structure of the equipment I want to create is quite special. I will first fuse them before tempering, Anduin explained to Brandwadden. Using control system magic, he manipulated the pieces of metal, transforming them into liquid form. He then carefully fused the two magical alloys according to the metal fusion ratio he had learned from the alchemy room at the Ministry of Magic. Once their structure stabilized, he shaped them and placed them in the stone scoop in front of him. Anduin, I still don't quite understand. Your alchemy skills are exceptional. From what I've seen, you can directly use magic to shape equipment. Why do you insist on using this traditional blacksmithing method? Brandwadden asked, puzzled by Anduin's approach. End of this chapter. Chapter 417, The Holy Artifact. You don't understand, Anduin said with a pleasant smile. Ordinary alchemists can indeed use magic to shape metals directly, but the connection between the magic metals that are mixed together is not close, and there will be some impurities. If you want to make them fully integrated and exert a stronger effect, forging is essential. Just like those superb goblin craftsmen, he continued, they are not ignorant of magic, but when creating high-quality equipment, they still choose this traditional craft. After the forging is completed and the runes are inscribed, they will be melted again. Only after such a process can the equipment created be called a holy weapon. Anduin had learned this craftsmanship from a goblin guard officer who had been too drunk during a business deal with Gringotts. He had also concluded this from his research on the Ghoul summoning bag and travel water bottle. The help of Minister Budnor was also indispensable. She had obtained a lot of alchemy materials for Anduin from her colleagues in the Merlin Cour. Budnor had promised to support him as much as possible, and she had kept her word. You want to create a holy artifact? Is it a sacred artifact like the Sword of Gryffindor or the Crown of Ravenclaw? Brandwadden asked in surprise. He had only known that Anduin had commissioned him to help forge a piece of equipment, but he hadn't expected it to be something so extraordinary. It's not considered a sacred artifact just yet. A magic sacred artifact still needs a lot of acquired training. The reason why magic sacred artifacts are powerful is that they all have the potential to grow and improve, Anduin explained, shaking his head slightly. His spirit was high, but he knew it would be an achievement just to create a holy artifact embryo. That's amazing too, Brandwadden exclaimed. If I can witness the birth of a new holy vessel today, what an honor it would be. I hope so. I don't know exactly how far I can go with this. Let's start. Remember to use the magic anvil and alchemy hammer I made for you, Anduin instructed. It was his first time creating such complicated equipment, and he was unsure of the outcome. Okay, don't worry. Brandwadden nodded solemnly. He turned to the other two centaurs and shouted, Work has started. Cheer me up today. Brandwadden placed the stone ladle into the giant furnace, and Bane worked hard to blow up the bellows. The fierce flames raged wildly in the furnace, but the metal in the stone ladle was not ordinary and was not easy to heat up. Everyone watched the changes in the metal in the furnace nervously. After nearly half an hour, the metal in the stone ladle turned into a cup of red metal liquid. Bane, who was in charge of starting the fire, was already so tired that he was sweating profusely, with sweat dripping to the ground. It's ready to be shaped. Put on the mold. Brandwadden yelled loudly when he saw that the heat was almost ready. Anduin reacted quickly, immediately taking out the box containing the dragon's heart tendon. This box was special, with a strong ability to withstand high temperatures. After he opened the box, Brandwadden directed Firenze to scoop out the high-temperature stone with iron tongues and pour it directly into the long box with the dragon heart tendon. As the smoking iron poured onto the dragon's heart tendon, it did not cause the slightest damage. The silver-blue light on its body did not weaken. Even when the metal solution completely submerged and wrapped the dragon heart tendon, the faint silver light shone through the red metal surface. The thing inside is probably an organ of a magical creature, but it's amazing that it can withstand such high temperatures, Brandwadden observed in awe. Anduin gazed at the mold in front of him with amazement. He smiled slightly, knowing the reason he had soaked the dragon heart tendon in desolate thunder for so long. Even though this tendon came from the ferocious Hebride's black dragon, it couldn't escape its biological attributes. By impregnating it with the magic power of wild thunder, which can resist fiendfire, it could withstand such high temperatures and endow the equipment with a powerful, wild thunder characteristic. Once the molten metal completely covered the dragon's heart tendon, everyone silently waited for it to cool down, aware that the real forging had yet to begin. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. The molten metal in the box solidified into a slightly red, square metal rod about 1 meter long. "Okay, get it on the anvil," Brandwalden sternly shouted to Firenze. Firenze, already prepared, immediately switched to a smaller pair of forging pliers, clamped the metal rod, and gently placed it on the anvil. Brandwalden and Anduin stepped forward, each taking a side. Brandwalden wielded a huge hammer, while Anduin held a slightly smaller one, standing on a riser due to the anvil's height. The continuous sound of clang, clang filled the air as Anduin and Brandwalden took turns striking the metal rod on the anvil with their hammers. With each hit, magic lines appeared on the surface of the anvil and the hammers, indicating that these tools were no ordinary items. They had been engraved with runes by Anduin, similar to his previous innocuous hammer, but more powerful. The two hammers, one large and one small, alternated in striking the metal rod, quickly flattening it into a half-palm-wide metal plate. After hammering the rod into a basic shape, they inserted it back into the furnace. Once the fire turned it red-hot again, they pulled it out and resumed hammering. After several repetitions, the original metal plate began to take its final shape, a four-sided Han sword with a metal handle. Each side was smooth and finely trimmed, with delicate lines and sparkling stars visible upon close inspection. "Quenching!" Brandwalden shouted as soon as the sword was shaped. Firenze carefully held the sword and inserted it into the water tank nearby. A puff of green smoke rose, and the sword emerged, fully formed. "It's finally half done," Brandwalden said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. The sword had been incredibly hard to work with, even at high temperatures, and it had taken considerable effort to reach this stage. "Now, I will engrave the runes on it and proceed to the next stage of forging. However, once it is endowed with spells and magic power, this level of temperature may no longer affect it," Anduin said, gasping for breath, clearly exhausted. End of this chapter. Chapter 418, Permanent Energy-Absorbing Curse. "Let's talk about everything after you have enchanted it," Brandwalden said, filling a large tank with water. He gestured outside with a nod. When everyone looked out of the felt bag, they found that it was already dark. It seemed that the next stage of forging would be completed by tomorrow at the earliest. If the progress of enchanting was slow, it might take a day or two more. Anduin nodded, then put away the sword embryo in his hand and returned to the camp with a few centaurs. He planned to stay there for the next few days to concentrate on forging this holy artifact, so he would live there directly. Upon returning to the camp, they found that Hogg and Ronan, who had been playing hard in the morning, were now hosting a bonfire party in the center of the camp. Most of the centaurs living nearby had come out to join in the fun, and everyone was in high spirits. However, Anduin was not in such a good mood. He ate some meat casually and then returned to the residence prepared by the centaurs. He wanted to spend the night thinking about the inscription of the runes. In fact, Anduin had already conceived the forging of this sword when he first obtained the dragon heart tendon. He had planned everything before starting, but the materials for making this piece of equipment were too precious. He needed to recheck the material and various attributes of the sword to be absolutely sure. As soon as Anduin returned to the room, he spread a layer of soft leather on the desk, carefully placed the sword embryo on top, and then took out various measuring instruments for testing. The four-faced Han sword was 110 centimeters long, with a blade length of 80 centimeters, a hilt length of 30 centimeters, and a net weight of 700 grams. Although the sword guard had not been installed yet, Anduin still felt very comfortable holding it. After careful testing, Anduin found that this Han sword had very strong magical properties. Since the casting material contained refined mithril and the built-in dragon heart tendon was used as the inner core, the efficiency of guiding magic was similar to that of a magic wand. It could even be said that this was a sword-shaped wand. The hardness of the sword blade was far superior to that of ordinary steel, even reaching the level of diamond. In terms of flexibility, Anduin could easily bend it to 90 degrees with just a little force against the spine of the sword. It had reached the perfect balance of rigidity and flexibility. It's truly a work of art. I've waited for you for nearly a year. The next step is to enchant you. This is the most important part, so I must be careful, Anduin thought to himself. He immediately took out a piece of parchment from the space ring. After spreading it out, there was a design drawing of a sword on it, with detailed lines carved on the spine, blade, tip, and hilt of the sword. This sword will be my main lethal equipment in the future, and it is extremely lethal. I have done a lot of interference, protection, movement, and sensing equipment before, but I rarely have lethal equipment. I have been waiting for you. First of all, as a sword, the most important thing is that it is strong enough. So, runes such as solidification, iron armor, fire protection, cold protection, and shock resistance must be added. These will be inscribed on the spine of the sword. Secondly, to ensure its flexibility, the transformation rune must also be included. This will be the core rune on the hilt. Additionally, to strengthen my control over this sword, I need to add the core rune control to the position of the sword frame. Based on my understanding of the control magic, even if this sword leaves my hand, it can still be driven like an extension of my arm. Thinking about it this way, Anduin couldn't help but chuckle. Why does this look more and more like a flying sword from the world of Xianja? He mused. In terms of killing power, the blessing. The power of Wild Thunder is already formidable, but its physical damage needs enhancement. Therefore, the Sharp Charm, decomposed from the Shen Feng Wuying curse, can be engraved on the blade and tip of the sword. During this year, through research on Shaltyr's vampire characteristics, I also developed an improved permanent energy-absorbing spell rune. After enchanting this rune, any creature with blood that is attacked will permanently lose a portion of its maximum magic power. The absorbed magic power will continue to strengthen the sword's power. Initially, Anduin was conflicted about engraving this rune. Adding it would turn the sword into a true killer, likely to be despised. The idea of reducing an opponent's magic power with a single strike seemed excessive. However, after much deliberation, Anduin decided to include it. He aimed to create the most satisfying, perfect, and powerful equipment possible, and this charm was essential. To avoid public outrage, he resolved to use the sword sparingly against ordinary opponents. Against formidable enemies, he would ensure they were eliminated swiftly, preventing anyone from noticing the sword's effects. Besides, not every wizard has the perception ability to accurately gauge their own magic power reserves. After double-checking the enchanting scheme on the design drawing, Anduin put it away confidently. He then washed up and rested early, preparing to recharge his energy and adjust to the best state for the inscription work. For the next 2 days, Anduin locked himself in his room, meticulously enchanting the sword embryo. To ensure the quality of the inscription, he avoided overexerting himself and made sure every rune was inscribed perfectly, without any mistakes. 2 days later, Anduin met with Brandwalden again, bringing the completed sword embryo. The next step was the second stage of reforging. During this stage, they would reshape the sword embryo, now brimming with magic power. Throughout the entire forging period, Anduin needed to personally infuse magic into it, transforming it into true magical equipment. After the reforging process, the sword could no longer be enchanted or inscribed. Any future processing or upgrades would require another reforging process. Anduin, Brandwalden, and their team returned to the forge at the mountain's peak and began their respective tasks with a tacit understanding. Once the furnace temperature rose again, Anduin took the rune-engraved sword embryo, inserted it into the furnace himself, and injected magic power into the sword through the metal tongues. The entire sword emitted a faint magical aura, and all the magic lines on its surface became visible. Interestingly, the super-high-temperature furnace seemed unable to affect the sword embryo. This was expected, as a blade inscribed with runes is already considered magical equipment. The flames couldn't even heat it to a red glow. End of this chapter. Chapter 419, Mutation. Everyone waited in front of the stove for nearly an hour. When Brandvaden finally took out the sword and touched it, he found it was only slightly warm, not even hot. It seems that the forging cannot be completed at the current temperature of the furnace. We still have to start a backup plan, Brandvaden said, shaking his head helplessly. Fortunately, they were already prepared for this. Anduin nodded. When the magic power is injected, all the runes on the sword embryo will be activated. It's too difficult to use ordinary flames. Then we'll use fiendfire, but for safety, we can't forge it indoors, Anduin suggested. He walked out of the felt bag and looked around, then pointed to a flat area outside the top of the mountain. Let's move the equipment there and reforge in the open air. Brandvaden nodded and directed several centaurs to carry out the anvil, workbench, and sink. Once everything was ready, Anduin addressed the centaurs solemnly. For safety's sake, I will complete the smelting work by myself. You all should stay far away. Anduin then took out a brazier and chanted a mantra to raise a wisp of fiendfire within it, carefully controlling the fire to prevent it from spreading. This was his first attempt at forging equipment with fiendfire, so he took out a metal kettle from his body, drained a ball of liquid from it, and arranged it around the brazier as a precaution. This water bottle was his replica of Newt's travel water bottle. Its function was similar to the original, but the materials were slightly different. Newt's bottle was made of Ulam steel and Iser mithril, while Anduin's used Agrippa alloy and Iser mithril. Though his induced water flow might not be as powerful as the original, it was sufficient to deal with ordinary fiendfire. I'm starting. If something unexpected happens, stay away, Anduin reminded everyone around him. He then focused his attention on the brazier. Holding the sword embryo in one hand, he stretched it into the brazier while controlling the fiendfire with his wand in the other hand. At the same time, he had to constantly infuse the sword embryo with magic, which was very exhausting. The sword embryo was surprisingly resistant to fiendfire. As soon as it touched the flame, the fire transformed into a miniature beast and bit fiercely at the sword embryo. However, the sword, glowing with magical runes, remained unscathed. After a while, the temperature began to rise slowly, and the blade started to turn red, showing signs of melting. Seeing this, Anduin immediately pulled out the sword embryo, and the water surrounding the brazier rushed up, instantly extinguishing the fire. He then moved to the anvil and began hammering the sword embryo without stopping. Brandvaden joined him, and together they performed a second forging on the blade. Throughout this process, Anduin's magic injection work could not be interrupted. He had to inject magic power into the blade while forging it with a hammer. This time, the forging process was faster than the first. The overall shape of the sword embryo had already been determined, and the runes were now familiar with Anduin's magic. The materials and runes were perfectly integrated. However, despite the shorter forging interval, both Anduin and Brandvaden felt that it took much more effort to strike the blade this time. Each strike felt like hitting a dense, unyielding surface, as if they were forging the magic power itself. To the young centaurs watching, the sword embryo seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, a testament to the powerful magic being infused into it. The scene of the two of them hammering the sword was nothing short of miraculous. With each vigorous strike, a burst of magical aura erupted from the sword's body, resembling gold and silver powder scattering through the air. These shimmering particles were actually magical impurities being expelled from the sword, and the forging process was purifying the sword's material. Initially, the hammers made full contact with the sword, producing a clear ping, ping, ping sound. However, as time passed, the hammers no longer touched the sword directly. Instead, arcs of electricity surged from the sword, and the sound of the hammering turned into a dull poof. All right, the next step is to repeat this process until there are no more impurities in the sword, Anduin said, his face lighting up with joy as he looked at the nearly finished sword. He then reignited the diamfire and resumed forging. This time, the diamfire burned significantly longer than before. As the sword glowed red-hot once more, Anduin and Brandvaden continued their hammering. With each repetition, the magical starlight that appeared on the sword diminished, replaced soft silver glow and electric arcs. The heating time required by the diamfire grew longer, and eventually it could only turn the sword a faint pink instead of red. "Look, the sky!" Firenze exclaimed, snapping out of his trance and pointing upwards. His shout drew the attention of Bane, Ronan, Hogg, and even Anduin and Brandwalden. Above them, the sky over Sword-Forging Mountain was covered with dark, ink-like clouds. The clouds seemed to press down on the mountain, and faint thunderstorms could be seen within them. "Is it because of the sword?" Anduin wondered, staring at the sword embryo in his hand. He had never heard of forging magical equipment causing such celestial phenomena. Could this sword truly reach the level of a holy weapon? He had a premonition that after the final forging, the Han sword would be complete. No matter how much it was burned, it would no longer react, and no more impurities could be expelled. "Brandwalden, this is the final moment." Anduin realized that the changes in the sky were caused by the sword. Now was not the time to be distracted by the celestial phenomena. They needed to complete the final forging. End of this chapter. Tashter, Chapter 420, Thunder Tribulation. The Elder of the Centaur, Brandwarden, nodded solemnly at the words, then gathered all his strength and slammed the sword embryo on the anvil fiercely. He had already consumed a lot of physical strength in the previous forging process, and the alchemy hammer in his hand absorbed the magic power in his body with every strike. The hammering and forging had taken a significant toll on him. However, seeing that the holy artifact was about to be completed, and knowing he was assisting in its creation, Brandwarden's spirits lifted. It was as if his fatigue had been pulled away. His muscles knotted, and every knock seemed to exhaust all his strength. Anduin's condition was not much better. In addition to burning and forging, he had to constantly inject magic power into the sword body. He had already consumed several bottles of potions, but now he could only grit his teeth and persevere. Ping, pong, ping, pong. The sound of hammer strikes reverberated in the ears of the onlookers. This time, the sound of metal striking metal was exceptionally short, only a few rings before it turned into a viscous poof sound. At the same time, the silver-blue electric arc shining on the struck sword became finer and thicker until the sword almost completely turned into the shape of lightning in their eyes. Firenze, who had been observing the sky, noticed that the dense clouds seemed to be getting closer and closer. The air was getting drier, as if a storm was about to fall at any moment. The flickering of thunder and lightning in the clouds became more frequent, and thunder rumbled over everyone. Anduin saw that the long sword on the anvil looked like a solid electric baton, and knew that the casting was about to be completed. He glanced up at the clouds with a tangled expression. Is this sword going to undergo a tribulation? Anduin felt the faint pressure in the sky and suddenly had a ridiculous idea. He didn't know what kind of changes would happen next, but he knew that the long sword was filled with mana. No matter how much more he tried to pour into it, it wouldn't absorb any more. Come what may, Anduin thought. Whether it's a tribulation or not, there's no running away. He felt overwhelmed but resolute. He dropped the alchemy hammer and reached out to grab the thunder sword in front of him. Seeing this, Brandwarden quickly stopped swinging the sledgehammer and slowly stepped back, staring at Anduin with a stern face. During the last few strikes, he had realized that the hammer could no longer strengthen the sword embryo. He had no idea what would happen next. Boom! Just as Anduin's right hand grabbed the long sword, a burst of thunder roared in the sky. The clouds began to stir in one direction, gradually forming a vortex like a typhoon blowing over the sea. In the center of this vortex, lightning bolts continuously gathered, tumbling and jumping as if accumulating power. The sight terrified the onlookers, causing them to take a few steps back involuntarily, leaving only Anduin on the hilltop platform. Anduin also panicked at the sight, but after he grabbed the thunder sword, he could feel the desolate thunder rune on the sword becoming very active, like a happy child. Facing these circumstances, Anduin knew there was nothing to worry about. He sensed the closeness of the desolate thunder rune to him, so he stopped hesitating and raised the long sword high, pointing directly at the center of the vortex in the sky. An aura seemed to pierce the sky, but then, nothing more. Anduin held up his long sword, pointing it at the thunderclouds for what felt like an eternity. He had expected the heavens to respond, perhaps with a bolt of lightning striking down like a divine treasure. However, the thunderclouds above showed no interest in his raised sword. They appeared to be nothing more than a fleeting vision, indifferent to his actions. The onlookers around him watched in silence, their faces displaying a mix of confusion and awe, as if they were witnessing something powerful they couldn't quite understand. As the moments dragged on without any response from the thunderclouds, Anduin, still holding his sword aloft, began to feel a twinge of embarrassment. He pursed his lips in frustration. Was this it? Had he really just stood there like a fool for nothing? It was akin to a person surrendering in fear to what they thought was an approaching army, only to realize it was just a group of cosplayers passing by. Anduin couldn't be blamed for his reaction. After all, he had just acquired a thunder attribute holy weapon, and the gathering thunderclouds seemed to promise something extraordinary. Who could have known they were merely spectators to his moment of triumph? As time passed, not only did the thunderclouds remain unresponsive, but the vision on Anduin's long sword also began to fade. The electric glow that had danced along the blade's surface retreated, revealing an exquisitely crafted Han sword. Realizing that nothing more was going to happen, Anduin sheathed his sword with a sigh of disappointment. He glanced up at the sky one last time before turning his attention back to the sword in his hand. The sword was entirely silver, with a mesmerizing phosphorescence that shone even in the gloomy light. Its blade and hilt were seamlessly forged, with the hilt wrapped in leather for a firm grip. Despite the anticlimactic end to his display, Anduin couldn't help but feel a surge of joy as he admired the craftsmanship of the Han sword. He began to swing it, testing its balance and sharpness. The sword moved gracefully in his hands, slicing through the air with a hiss like a silver snake. It danced and weaved, a blur of motion that seemed almost alive. Anduin's movements grew more fluid and confident, his steps light and precise. He executed a series of sword moves, sometimes as swift as lightning, other times as gentle as falling leaves. Finally, Anduin performed a flourish, spinning the sword and holding it flat with just one finger on the guard. But as he did so, the sword began to tilt slightly towards the tip. Huh? That's strange. The balance of this sword is off. Why is the blade 100 grams heavier than the hilt? Anduin muttered, frowning at the tilted sword. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, he slapped his forehead. How could I forget that? End of this chapter.